Okay, so why don't we get started? The name of the new tshuva that we're going to study today is Nasa b'Trump b'li chagora v'hanahag kibel kenas. Okay. Oh, sorry. Not Trump. I think, doesn't Trump have an olive? Does Trump? I think Trump has an olive. Okay. So what do you think this is talking about? What is a tramp in Hebrew? It's a hitchhike. Okay, so a guy picks up a hitchhiker or, a friend who needs a ride. The guy doesn't put on his seatbelt. And the driver says, you ought to put on your seatbelt. He says, no seatbelt. All of a sudden he gets pulled over by a cop. Cop issues a ticket because his passenger was not wearing a seatbelt. Who's liable for payment? Okay, what do you think? Okay, let's first read the shaila. Nasati b'Trump l'shchunat Bayit Vegan. I took a hitchhike to Bayit Vegan in Jerusalem. V'lo chagarti chagurat b'tichot, and I didn't wear my safety belt. Uvederech atzar otanu shoter v'natan knas l'nahag biglali, and on the way we get stopped by a police officer who issues a ticket to the driver because of me. Do I have to pay for the ticket? All right, what do you think?
Driver, yes, I shouldn't have driven if the guy didn't put on his seatbelt.
So can you make that argument, Barry? Maybe
Yeah.
Barry's right.
Yeah, so if you don't put your seatbelt, I'm not taking you.
I just say, I'm just going to wait here until you put on your seatbelt. We don't know.
Okay, that assume that you factor, you ask him to put on a seatbelt, that would be a factor.
Maybe.
It seems like he has an obligation to wear a seatbelt, but it's
Yeah.
not.
But I think that before you go, it's up to the driver to make, that's why they ticket the driver.
Yeah, so the driver has to pay the ticket, no question, but can you get indemnity from the guy who caused him to get the ticket? I think that's the shot.
Yeah, the shaila is, does the guy who wasn't wearing the belt, does he have to pay back his driver for having to pay for his ticket? So Rav Sharaga writes as follows. He says, Pashut hadavar shetzarich lahakpid lifnei kol nesiya lachgor chagurat b'tichot kefi shahachok mechayev. He says it's obvious that before driving, you always have to wear your seatbelt because that's what the law requires. Kevin shechagurat habetichot miginal ha'adam baderech klal mipnei pigia be'et hitnagshut. He says the reason, obviously, is because the safety belt protects a person in general from getting injured when there's an accident. Umonat mimenu shelo ye'ara lo kol nezek bizman te'una chas v'shalom. So, and it prevents him from damage, from injury at a time of an accident. Now, what does hitnagshut mean? What does that word hitnagshut mean? Hold on a second. Okay.
Collision.
It protects him from any kind of injury at a time of a collision. That's what hitnagshut means. Okay. Now we know the Torah says you have to protect yourself, protect your life. You have to be very protective of your soul. The Torah commands that every man, every person has to protect preserve his soul. Whenever you do something reckless without exercising safety precautions, you violate these two mitzvahs. Okay? If you do take proper safety precautions, such as wearing a seatbelt, then you are fulfilling these two mitzvahs. Ki chaviva nafsho shel Yisrael, shafilu Shabbos v'yom HaKippurim nidcha mipnei pikuach nefesh. He says, look how precious the soul of a Jew is, that you can violate even Shabbos and Yom Kippur for the sake of preserving someone's life. V'lachein haTorah hizhira shemor nafshecha ma'od. And therefore the Torah says, be very protective of your soul. Okay? The Makor Baruch just adds, B'chei nifsak b'shulchan aruch. This is also paskened in Shulchan Aruch. Shetzarach lihi shamer ma'od mikol davar sheyachol lavo lidei sakanas nefashos. You have to be very careful to protect yourself from doing anything that could bring to an endangerment. B'zel lashon haShulchan Aruch sham. Shulchan Aruch writes, V'chein kol michshol sheyesh bo sakanas nefashos. Any kind of Michshol is a stumbling block or something that you do that's irresponsible, that involves endangerment. Mitzvahs aseh lahasiro. There's a positive commandment to remove that kind of situation. In other words, if there's a dangerous situation that presents itself, an obstacle that could potentially be dangerous, you have an obligation to remove it. Uli shamar mimenu, uli zaber b'davar yafa. And you have to be very, very careful. Shenamar, Yishomer lacha, ushmor nafshecha. As it says, be very protective of your soul. Vimlo heisir, v'hiniach hamichshalos hamivim lidei sakana. And if you don't remove something that presents a danger, and you allow it to remain in your environment, I guess, I don't know, maybe like there's a ditch in your house that people could fall into. There's a swimming pool and you don't put up a gate, right? Bitel mitzvahs aseh ve'ovar below sasim damim. You have nullified a positive commandment and you violate the another commandment is lo tasim damim beveitecha. You may not place blood in your house. Now that pasuk is in reference to what? Anyone know what that pasuk is in reference to? Lo tasim damim beveitecha. Do not place blood in your house. It's the parapet, the ma'aket, the obligation to build a fence on a rooftop that is used regularly. You have an obligation to build a fence around it. And if you don't, you're placing blood in your house. Harbe dvarim asru chachamim mipnei sheyesh bahem sakanas nefashos. There are many things that the rabbis forbade because they present a threat to one's life or limb, and not because they're halachically prohibited. Kol ha'over al dvarim elu v'chayotze bahem. If a person violates these things, va'amar hareini misakin ba'atzmi malacher malai bekach, and his attitude is, mind your own business, it's my life, I can do whatever I want. O eni makbid bekach, or I don't care. Makin oso makas mardus. That person is arrested by the Beis and given lashes, right? That was the good old days when a Beis could go and basically see a guy misbehaving and just pull him off the street and bring him to the Beis and say, we're giving you lashes because you're not being a good person. V'hanizar behem alav tavo birchat. And a person who's careful on these matters will receive a very good blessing. So that's the language of the Shulchan Aruch itself, okay? Which is an unusual kind of language to find in the Shulchan Aruch. But it's in Siman Tav Chaf Zayin, where he discusses, I guess the Shulchan Aruch discusses things that are usher because of sakana. Now, that being said, you're obligated to wear your seatbelt. And unfortunately, I'm guilty of this sometimes when I'm in a rush and I'm just going from my house to the shul. I sometimes don't put on my seatbelt. And my wife told me, you have to put on your seatbelt. And she's right. And
You ignore the beeping?
Yeah, beeping you go.
you know something? I've become totally oblivious to the beeping. And in a Nissan, it turns off after about 30 seconds. So, but I have to wear my seatbelt. I have to, yeah. V'lachei nosea shalocho ger chagurat betichot over al ha'isurim ha'elu. And therefore, a person who travels without wearing his seatbelt is violating these Torah violations. U'mesaken es atzmo, and he's endangering himself. Ki hachagora goremet harbe pamim leminiat sakana. Because quite often wearing a seatbelt prevents a dangerous situation to your life. Like if you get into an accident, God forbid, the seatbelt can prevent you from hitting your head or going through the window, the windshield. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
In fact, in secular law, if the passenger failed to wear the seatbelt, driver gets into a collision and is found to be negligent, causing, this guy goes through the window or something like that, the passenger, because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, the court will find him contributory negligence causing his own damages, which otherwise, had he had the belt on, he may have banged his head, but he wouldn't have gone through the windshield had he secured himself.
Right.
And the court will discount, say, $1 million claim is a paraplegic. They'll discount the damages 50, 75% because he caused his own damage, the driver didn't.
Yes.
It wasn't his fault.
Yeah, it wasn't his fault, but his damages, 75% of his damages, because he wouldn't have otherwise gone through the window and smashed his head on the sidewalk, were caused by his own negligence in not wearing his seatbelt. That's the consequence of that.
Yeah. ומיטעם זה אסור גם לדבר עם הנהג דברים שעלולים להטריד אותו ולסלק אותו מהריכוז. For this reason, when you're a passenger, you're not allowed to speak to the driver in a way that will cause him to get overly distracted. ולכן שיחה בטלפון המצריכה ריכוז בעת הנהיגה אסורה, and therefore talking on the phone while you're driving, I think he's talking about before they had the hands free. Okay, he says that is usher, afilu im diborit, even with a speaker. He says, kevin shehu mazin lemisha medaber ito, v'choshev malahashiv lo ve'al pi halacha nahag chayav liot merukaz b'nehiga. That's a big chumrah that he's bringing. I'm not sure if all the poskim will agree with this. He says talking on a telephone, even with a speaker, he says he feels is problematic, because it's distracting you from your driving. It's called distracted driving. Probably in the 2000s, I would imagine. I can look it up. Let me just see. Tell you. On there. I have to go back to the very earliest one. Let me just bring it up. Tufshin Ayin Zion. So it's written, we're now in Tufshin Pei Hey. It's only written 8 years ago. So what is 8 years ago? 2016. 2016. It's not that long ago. Right? Okay. So anyway, he feels that that's problematic. Please move this window away from this shared application. What's going on? Hold on. There we go. Okay. V'im medaber dvarim k'tsarim k'gon nahagei moniot u'chedoime. But if you're having short conversations, like you're a taxi driver and you're speaking to Itzik, the dispatcher, or whatever it is, mutar rak b'diborit, then you can only do so if you're on a speaker. Aval b'li diborit b'chol mikre asur. But without a speaker, without the hands-free, then it's surely going to be asur. V'harehu karav lihiot lamazik b'mezid. And it is as if you are a mazid. You're asking for trouble, asking to get yourself into an accident. V'yesh shekasvu, sheyesh lo din rodef. And there are people who write that you're a rodef. If you're a driver who's a reckless driver, You're a rodev. You're just waiting. You're a predator waiting to cause injury or worse to other people who are on the street. He's really very quite harsh in his language. This is really, really serious stuff. ובכלל זה, אדם שחונה עם רכבו במקום שעל פי תקנות התנועה אסור לחנות שם, included in someone who's a reckless driver is if he parks in a place where he's not allowed to park. And so Kosav, because a lot of times the reason you can't park there is because you're obstructing people, and you're just inviting an accident.
Welcome to Pub Arcade Plaza.
Oh wow. Kosav b'shut Mishnah halachos milvad masha ovrin bazeh al dina de malchusa dina. He says, besides violating the halacha of the law of the land is, and by the way, Ron, I agree with you. I think it's absolutely obnoxious how people I don't know why Chabad Gate of all places, but there are people who feel that parking lot belongs to them. It's their exclusive parking lot. And they park in the fire lane when there are plenty of places to park. It's just, it's remarkable to me. And we're talking about members of our own community. I'm sorry to say. And I don't get it. I mean, I'm very rarely at the Chabad Gate shopping center, but whenever I'm there, it's uncanny to me how people just behave that way. Okay. He says, so in addition to violating Dina de Malchusa Dina by parking in a spot where you're not allowed to park, Yesh bazeh od iser shel gezel harabim. He says, you're stealing from the public. Kevin de harachov shayach lekulam v'hu gozel mehem. Because the street is public property. It's a public thoroughfare, and you're stealing from people and blocking the thoroughfare. You know, I think like Rav Sharaga is trying to get out all of his resentments and aggressions in writing this tshuva. It's like he's probably driven in Yerushalayim streets before, and he's saying, I can't stand this. Let me write a tshuva about it. And if you park in a place where you're endangering pedestrians, which could happen, like if you park, let's say, onto the sidewalk, and now people who are pedestrians have to walk into the street in order to be able to get by. Over alosasim davim b'beisecha. You're placing blood in your household. Uvitel mitzvah saseshel v'asisamaka legagecha. You're violating the positive commandment of making a parapet. Ve'alifnei iver lo titein mishol, and causing people to endanger themselves. And that's a lifnei iver. You're causing people to do something that's wrong. B'kol shekenim choneh al hamidracha v'ha'ovrim v'shavim yardim lakvish u'mistaknim. He says that's certainly true. If you park on the sidewalk, forcing people to walk out into the street and endangering themselves. So, getting back to our shaila, ula'etzem ha'she'ela im hanosea chayav l'shalem et haknas. Does the passenger have to pay the ticket? Nira shahanosea patur milashalem lanahaget haknas she'asula. Technically, the passenger is patur from paying for the parking ticket for the ticket violation. Why? Kevin shahita chova al hanahag lo lahamshich banesiya ad sheyachgor et hachagura. That's what Barry was saying, because it was an obligation upon the driver not to drive until the guy put on his seatbelt. V'lachein im nasa im chaver o b'tramp v'lo chagar chagurat b'tichot. And therefore, if you pick up a friend or a guy, you pick up a hitchhiker, and the guy does not put on his seatbelt, Einu chayav l'shalem lenahaget haknas, va'af lo lotzeis yidei shamayim. He's not obligated either in a mortal court nor from a heavenly point of view, because the negligence is exclusively that, I don't know if it's exclusively, but it's primarily that of the driver. Kevin shanahag hu shehizik et atzmo yidei shanasa benigud lachok. Because the driver now is forbidden from driving, right? He's not allowed to drive if a passenger of his is not wearing his seatbelt. And by the way, Uber drivers will tell you the same thing. You know, I'm sorry, sir, I'm not allowed to drive until you're wearing your seatbelt. Can you please put on your seatbelt? Ki hachova mutelis lachgor chagurat betichot rakim harechev noseya. He says the obligation to put on a seatbelt is only when you're driving. Aval im harechev nimtza choneh b'migrash chaniya, hachok lo mechayev lachgor chagura. If the car is parked in a parking garage, you don't have to wear your seatbelt if you're sitting in your car, right? That's the law, right? And therefore, who's the one who's in violation? It's the driver, not the passenger. And the moment the driver started driving with his passenger not wearing his belt, he's the one who violated the law, and he's the one who has to pay the penalty. Okay, what do you say, Marv?
You know what, I gotta look at the law here and see whether or not it's on the person who's the passenger also, or is it just on the driver, like he says here?
Okay,
But I don't know.
that's your homework. Okay.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm
I'm pretty confident it's the driver, pretty confident it's the driver. only.
Yeah.
What?
I'm pretty confident it's the driver only.
That is only on the driver?
Please do. Have the wrong one, so that's.
Maybe that everybody in the car is obligated to wear their own seatbelt, I don't know.
It'd be interesting.
After that whole thing, Memphis, how important it is to preserve their life and their safety, to not have any responsibility yourself to put it on. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, it is. It is. But I think that he's allowing his emotions to maybe a little bit run away with him over here. Because I would think also, like Marvin said, that there should be some joint liability. Especially if the driver says, you're really supposed to be wearing your seatbelt. And like you said, Joby, the fact that I don't wear my seatbelt means I'm endangering myself and I'm in violation of halacha. All right, let's see what the Makor Baruch says. He says, Ayin b'shailas teshuvas vayitzbar Yosef, sheherich b'nidon didan, shehanoseya patur delo yehe ela grama. So the Sefer Vayitzbar Yosef, again, a contemporary Sefer, also makes this similar argument that the passenger is patur because he's only a grama, he's only doing causative damage. Ugrama b'nezikin patur, and causative damage is patur. Ela shesiyim sham dekevin de grama chayv b'dinei shamayim al ken yesh lanosei l'shalom l'nahaget haknas k'dei latzes yidei shamayim ayin sham. His opinion is that a grama is, from a heavenly point of view, still liable. It's just that from a mortal court, we can't hold you liable, but a heavenly court still holds you liable. And therefore, to fulfill your heavenly obligation, you should pay the guy for the ticket. Amnam b'das Rabbeinu Hagon hamachaber shlita shekasav lehedja shapatur l'shalim afilu medinei shamayim. But so why does Rav Sharaga say that he's patur even from a heavenly point of view? Near desvirle de'ein ze grama klal. He holds that it's not causative damage. I didn't cause you to get a ticket. You drove. In other words, the fact that I'm not wearing a seatbelt is not causative damage, because if you weren't driving, I wouldn't be violating the law and you wouldn't be subject to get a ticket. It's all because you're driving. Okay? Because if you wouldn't start driving and I'm just sitting in your car without a seatbelt, I wouldn't be doing anything against the law. And he says, both Rav Bloy and the Emek HaMishpat also agree with Rav Sharaga. So seems to be a little bit of a difference of perspective among some of the poskim, but it seems like the majority hold like Rav Sharaga. V'ayin od b'mishpatei haTorah v'nir medivreim depoter afilu midinei shamayim. Seems also this Sefer Mishpatei haTorah holds the same thing. V'hosif lanu Rabbeinu Hagon HaMachaber Shlita D'Yeshlomer Degami Chashvinu LeKagrama Kevin Shebiglolo Hanahag Yitchayev L'Shalem. Rav Sharaga added to us, I guess this is verbally, even if you're going to argue that, there's still some liability on the part of the passenger because, he didn't put on his seatbelt. Mikol Melkom Yesh L'Potro Kevin Shlohaita Lo Shum Kavana Lahazik L'Nahag. But his intention was not to get the driver in trouble and cause him to get a ticket. Ugrama b'chiyah gavna pater afilu lotzes yidei shamayim ad kan devarav. And as we learned before, if I do causative damage through an act of malice, then I'm liable from a heavenly court. But if it was totally unintended, then even from a heavenly perspective, I'm not going to be liable. And therefore, by my not putting on my seatbelt, I didn't intend for you to get in trouble. He says, because the Meiri, one of the Rishonim, seems to agree with that, because he writes, he says, because the Meiri writes, you're only going to be liable midine shamayim if your intention was to remove payment from off of yourself and place it on someone else. In other words, if you did an act of causative damage where you intended malice and you did it in such a way that you could get off the hook because you know the halacha and you figured out a way that I can cause this guy damage and they won't be able to pin it on me, they won't hold me liable. That's the only time the Meiri says that you're liable from a heavenly perspective. But if your intention was not to cause a person financial loss, pater afilu b'dinei shamayim, then you're going to be pater even from a heavenly perspective. Shuv matzanu shekain kasav b'shut ha'ma'arit lahedja, because of the kaven dafilu imasa grama b'mezid hayapater midinei adam, al kain keshasa b'shogeg pater afilu b'dinei shamayim. This is what a number of other poskim say. He says, "Va'ainod bepischei Choshen shekasav ladon b'chiyagavna shanuseya hiter chaguraso be'emsa nasiya v'lo hirgish bo hanahag b'kibel knas." So Rav Bloy deliberates over the following scenario: what if a guy put on his seatbelt when the driver started driving, and then without the driver even being aware of it, he took off his seatbelt? Okay, in the middle of the drive. There, the Rav Bloy deliberates and suggests that in that case there's causative damage, and at least b'dinei shamayim he would have to pay for the ticket. The Sefer Vayomer Yehuda says they should split the ticket in that case. But based on what I wrote above, that as long as your intention was not to get the driver in trouble, we could argue that you'll be putter completely. In other words, let's say a guy took off his seatbelt because he had something in his pocket or something was underneath, he needed to go pick something that fell onto the floor, right? It's temporarily removes his seatbelt. The driver can't stop him for that short moment. And then all of a sudden they get pulled over by a cop and the cop sees the guy's not wearing his seatbelt. Okay. So in that kind of situation, some poskim would suggest that you would have to split the cost of the ticket.
Just what happens if you take seatbelt off, but the driver even knowing about it?
That's right. That's what we're talking
Same
about.
thing.
Yeah.
So you went against the driver's rule, and
Yeah.
the driver doesn't even know about it.
Right.
So-
There's right there. There's more reason to argue that that the passenger would be liable, at least partially liable. Remember that there's a principle that Rav Sharaga seems to be subscribing to, that as long as my intention was not to cause you damage, even though I inadvertently did, I'm not going to be liable even from a heavenly perspective. All right, so bottom line is, wear your seatbelt.
So we'll watch you when we drive home.
Okay, I'm going to wear my seatbelt.
Put it into action. What you learned.
Okay, we'll hold it here for today.